Hey everybody, Derek Foster here with Scott Brown, Edgewater Family Wealth. We're kicking off our inaugural This Not That, TNT for short, planning series. So we're going to talk today a little bit about some things to maybe focus on and some things to not focus on whenever you're looking at the planning and the numbers specific to returns, linear versus not linear, and we can kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the idea for this, not that is oftentimes when clients or potential clients come in, they focus on this instead of that, this typically being what they've been taught to focus on and that being what they probably should focus on. So to that end, oftentimes when you come in to see us, we talk about the return needed. I call it the endowment number, the return you need to accomplish your goals. So if you're 65 years old, you're going to get this much Social Security, you have this much saved, you're going to save for another year or two, maybe there's an inheritance, maybe there's a home sale, whatever it is, leads us to an endowment number, and that number is the return we typically show clients first. So that number in our example today is about 5%. So why we want you to understand the number and the return needed, what we don't want you to think, what you typically think is that I'm going to get that number. So on each and every year. So if we say, well, you need to earn 5% to be successful, Derek. Sometimes people go, oh, okay, well then I'll earn 5, right? Because when we're showing you a hypothetical example in goal planning and monitoring, am I right?
Yep.
Typically we're showing them a straight line return just to make a point.
Yes.
That is the this in this conversation that we don't want you to focus on. So what would be an alternative to thinking that way?
Yeah. So one thing that we like to bounce from once we get off of this, thing that we don't have a linear return, we'll jump over to what we call an individual trial, and that's going to give folks a little bit better understanding of how the market might actually behave. So if you see here on the screen, now we're looking at 22% in year one, and then very next year we're down 15. That seems a lot more close to reality, doesn't it?
Right, and that might seem a little daunting for somebody to look at, but what Derek's done here is he's taken one of the 1,000 simulations or iterations of potential outcomes from our software and showing you one of them. We'll do this oftentimes in a meeting. We'll say, look, I don't want you to get addicted to this, and this being the linear return. I want you to pay attention to that. In this example, that is still the same return. It's just not in a linear fashion. Again, it's not 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. It's up 20, down 15, up 6, down 3, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see in the example we're showing you right now, this is just one of 1,000 iterations. It doesn't mean, in fact, I'm sure that this iteration will not be repeated, correct? But it's really to drive the point home that these fluctuations in return are what lead to the average return. Averages are born of different numbers, yes? Averages don't work like if you say the S&P, some people say, well, the S&P will make up a number 9 or 10% a year for the last 100 years. It didn't earn 9, 9, 9, 9, 9. It earned 15 and -3 and -27 and up 6 and so on and so forth. That all goes into a blender, which gives us an average return. So the iteration that you're looking at right now has some extremes in it, one of which is up almost 22%, and then there's another extreme somewhere down the road here. Let me find a really nasty one of those years where you're all calling me. We're down 14.3. So if you look at these examples, you can see the differential in the return from year to year. And one of the things that I think frustrates the average client and or potential client is that their expectation of this return being linear and never varying. So when you look at an example, we see it a lot in insurance illustrations, where the client will say, well, it said I was going to earn this, that, or the other. Well, it's or 12% or 10% or some probably unrealistic number, which is why we try to show them this.
Yeah. And then one other point to be noticed here is this example has a 75 or 76% chance of success. Success being not running out of money before your plan expires or you expire, however you want to look at that. And the one piece to see here is obviously this 22% positive and 15% negative. sounds pretty familiar. We had pretty good markets in prior years, followed by last year where the S&P was down about 19 and the aggregate bond index, which tracks the bond pricing, was down about 13 at the same time. If we were to look at that example in the planning, that 75%, say in 2020
Yep.
versus now is probably still right about 75%.
It's very indicative of what you're saying, and I think, again, it's critical for the people. Sometimes people think, well, we've had this terrible year, and now everything's a mess. But the reality is we've already shown that in the projection that you're going to have a terrible year. I'm very fond of saying you're going to have good years, you're going to have bad years, and you're going to have everything in between. If you get all bent out of shape during the bad ones, which PS is in the planning, we're literally showing you those bad years and showing that success is still at the bottom of the projection. You'll be fine more than likely if you show some patience, and really in showing this last iteration that we're showing now is to show you that it's baked into the cake.
Exactly. All right.
So that's, ultimately with our this or that planning series, which Derek will be bringing to you hopefully on a monthly basis, we want to kind of illustrate things that people tend to focus on, this, versus the things that they should focus on, which is that. Now, I would argue most of that should be left to us, and that you should spend most of your time on the golf course, fishing, or with your grandchildren. But certainly, hopefully, this helps a few people process and gives them a visual that makes some sense and keeps them engaged in the proper way.
Yep, absolutely.